Hello guys, welcome to my shop. And today, I will introduce to you the farm tools in horticultural operations. The first one is crowbar. Crowbar is used for digging big holes, digging out big stones, and also stumps. Pick mattock. Pick mattock is used for digging canals, breaking hard topsoil, and for digging up stones and tree stumps. Spade. Spade is used for removing trash, digging canals or ditches, and mixing soil media. Shovel. Shovel is used for removing trash, digging loose soil, moving soil from one place to another, and also mixing soil media. Rake. Rake is used for cleaning ground and leveling topsoil. Spading fork. Spading fork is used for loosening the soil, digging out crops, and turning over the materials in a compost heap. Light hoe. Light hoe is used for loosening and leveling soil and digging out furrows for planting. Grab hoe. Grab hoe is used for breaking hard topsoil and pulverizing soil. Hard trowel. Hard trowel is used for loosening the soil around the growing plants and putting small amount of manure fertilizer into the soil. Hand cultivator. Hand cultivator is used for cultivating the garden plot by loosening the soil and removing weeds around the plant. Hand fork. Hand fork is used for interrow cultivation. Pruning shears. Pruning shears is for cutting branches of planting materials and unnecessary branches of plants. Axe. Axe is for cutting bigger size posts. Knife. Knife is for cutting plant materials and for performing other operations in horticulture. Water pails. Water pails is used for holding water, manure, and fertilizers. Sprayers. Sprayers is a device used to spray liquid where sprayers are commonly used for projection of water, weed killers, crop performance materials, and pest maintenance chemicals. Sickle. Sickle is a handheld agricultural tool with a variously curved blade. The next one is farm implements. These are the accessories which are pulled by working animals or mounted to machineries which are usually used in preparation of land. The first is plows. These are farm implements used in horticultural operations either pulled by a working animal or tractor. Plow is specifically used for tilling large areas, making furrows, and interrow cultivation. The next one is harrow. The native harrow is made of wood with a metal tip and pulled by a carabao while the disc harrow is made of metal mounted to a tractor. Harrows are used for tilling and pulverizing the soil. The last one is rotavator. The rotavator is an implement attached to a tractor and used for tilling and pulverizing the soil. That's all guys. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Ivan Cruz, and I will be talking about common farming equipments. So, these machineries, tools, and equipments that I will be talking about are usually used in horticultural operations. So, these tools, machineries, and equipments are made for the farmers to improve their farm production as well as to help them reduce their labor. So, here are the list of four-wheel tractor is one of the essential machinery in the farm. It is the most common farming equipment worldwide. Four-wheel tractor, just like hand tractor, is used to pull, plow, and harrow, but it is for preparing for much bigger area of land. So, the third one, water pump. Water pump is an electromechanical machine used to increase the pressure of water to move it from one point to another. So to put it simply, it is used to draw irrigation water from source to the crops. Next is machete. Machete is a large heavy knife used for cutting. Machete is mainly used for mowing the grass, cutting or pruning the plants or brush. Next one is hoe. Hoe, also known as escardilla, is a long-handled gardening tool with a thin metal blade, and it is mainly used for removing weeds and breaking up soil. Next is shovel. Shovel is a tool with a broad flat blade and typically upturned sides. This equipment is mainly used for digging the soil. Next is sprinkler. Sprinkler is a device that sprays water, and it is mainly used for watering seedlings, plants, and crops. And lastly, a wheelbarrow. Wheelbarrow is a small hand-propelled carrier with only one wheel intended to be pushed and guided by a single person using two handles from the back. It is also known as the wheel cart. It is mainly used for carrying loads in gardening. That's all.
Now, we're gonna talk about the preparative checkup of farm tools, the implements, and equipment. Let's start off with the basic, which is removing of rust with shovel, spade, hoe, and blades, and extend the life of the tool, and also it will cut through the soil better. You can use whetstone, which is an ideal tool to keep all the cutting edges of your garden tool out. Put the whetstone on a tool that can stabilize it, like bench vise, and apply a little lubricating oil on the end of the tool and carefully work on the stone over the blade. Now, the moving parts of your garden tools should be disassembled, then spray and scrubbing bubbles, then you can clean those metal parts with a wire brush or those rust with a fine steel wool. You can also use an old toothbrush with some of lubricating oil to use on the joints of the garden tools. Medium grit sandpaper can also be used on a larger tools such as shovels, spades, and hoes. Let's now go to sharpening of farm tools. When sharpening your tools, try to maintain the original factory level or angle like in this video.
I started by flattening the back of the blades with 120 grit sandpaper on my lapping plate. If you want to know how to make a lapping plate, there's a link to that video in the description. I kept going until the edge had a flat surface all the way across. The backs of the blades are concave to make sharpening easier and reduce friction while cutting.
Then now, let's watch this 3-minute video for cleaning and sharpening your garden tools.
Start with the step edger tool first. I'm going to dunk it in some water and use a brush to scrub off any big chunks of dirt so that I'm starting with as clean a tool as possible. And this is what I do with pretty much every tool to begin with. I clean off the blade and the handle as well, then dry it off. Then I use scrubbing bubbles to spray down just the blade, and this will help to soften sap and helps to remove rust. After a few minutes, I use an SOS steel wool scrubbing pad to buff up the metal and remove as much debris as I can from the blade. Then I dunk it again in water and dry it off. Now I want to sharpen the edge of the blade, and I'm using a 6-inch mill file to do this, and this will help the blade cut through roots and soil really easily. You want to find the beveled edge first and hold the file at a 45-degree angle and make quick motions away from the blade all along the edge. Our last step is to apply a light layer of vegetable oil over the blade to help keep rust away. Now, if you have a tool with a wood handle like this one does, you want to feel the wood to see if it's nice and smooth. And if it's not, take a piece of sandpaper and lightly sand the handle to where it feels really nice in your hand, nice and smooth. The handle on this tool feels pretty good, so I'm going to skip that step, but I am going to apply a layer of linseed oil with a rag to help extend the life of the wood by protecting and sealing it. Next, I'm going to work on this hand trowel, and you can tell by the looks of it that this is one of the most used tools in my garden. It planted well over 1,000 4-inch plants last year in my garden alone. I'll be going through the same exact process with this one as I did with the edger tool. I clean all the excess soil off the blade and handle, dry it, then spray it down with scrubbing bubbles and let it sit for a few minutes. I am going to use a little stainless wire brush to help remove the bigger pieces of finish and debris, and we'll follow up with my SOS steel wool pad. You can spend as much time on this as you want, but once you're happy with how it looks, just rinse it off with water, dry it, and then proceed with sharpening it the same way as the edger, with the 6-inch mill file and then a light layer of vegetable oil. This tool also has a wood handle, so I applied linseed oil to finish it up. Moving on to the hand pruners, I'm skipping the first cleaning step because these don't have a bunch of soil on them. So I'll spray them down with the scrubbing bubbles, and after a few minutes, I'll use the wire brush to get most of the debris off. I like to use this type of brush for these pruners because they make it really easy to get into all the tight spots. Then I follow up with the steel wool pad to buff up the metal, and then wash them off with water and dry them thoroughly. To sharpen these, I'm using a carbide file. These are the easiest, in my opinion, to use for smaller blades like this one. You just cradle the pruners in your hand and hold the file at an angle on the beveled edge of the pruner and move them across the blade in a sweeping motion a few times, checking the blade for sharpness as you go. When they feel nice and sharp, flip the blade over and check to see if there's a little burr on the back side of the blade, which is just a little bump that's created by the sharpening. If there is one, use the file and sweep it across the burr a couple times to remove it. The last step is to apply a little 3-in-1 oil to the mechanism of the pruners. Open and close the pruners several times to help spread that oil throughout the mechanism, and they feel just as good as new. I cleaned up and sharpened the snips next and did exactly the same thing with these as I did with my hand pruners, super easy. And last I'm going to tackle the loppers, which are in kind of a bad way. They were left out one too many times last year. I'm going to treat these the same way, except I'm going to take these apart to get them as clean as possible. You can see a lot of rust made it to the inside, and I want to get rid of as much of that as possible. I sprayed them down with scrubbing bubbles and let them sit for a few minutes, then went after them with the wire brush and steel wool pad. Because these were so far gone, I repeated this step several times. Then I put them back together and sharpened them using the carbide file in the same way that I did with my hand pruners. These took a little bit more filing though because there were several notches in the blade that I had to file out. When that was done, I applied a little 3-in-1 oil to the joints.
And that's all.
Hi, I'm James Federico Panang reporting Farm English. Seeds. A mature plant ovule composed of an embryo, an endosperm, and a seed coat. Seedlings. A seedling is a young sporophyte developing out of a plant embryo from a seed. Fertilizers. Natural artificial substance containing chemical elements that improve growth and productiveness of plants. Fertilizers enhance the natural fertility of the soil or replace the chemical elements taken from the soil by previous crops. Natural fertilizers are organic products that have been extracted from living things and from the earth. They can be either plant-derived or animal-derived. Artificial fertilizers are plant nutrients produced through a chemical process to nurture soil and foster plant growth. Insecticides. Insecticides are substances used to kill insects. There are two types of insecticides. Synthetic insecticides. Synthetic compound insecticides are not the primary agents of insect control. In general, they penetrate insects readily and are toxic to a wide range of species. Natural insecticides contain chemical, mineral, and biological materials, and some are available commercially. Metal harm that causes by using insecticides. Effects on non-target species. Some insecticides kill or harm other creatures in addition to those they are intended to kill. For example, birds. Second, pollinator decline. Insecticides can kill bees and may be a cause of pollinator decline, the loss of bees that pollinate plants and colony collapse disorder. Bird decline. Besides the effects of direct consumption of insecticides, Populations of insectivorous birds decline due to the collapse of their prey population. Spraying of specifically wet and corn in Europe is believed to have caused an 80% decline in flying insects, which in turn has reduced local birds population by 1 to 2/3.
Guys, I am Marcus Antonio Manalacao and I will be talking about applying appropriate safety measures while working in the farm. So, agricultural workers are exposed to a tremendous variety of environmental hazards that are potentially harmful for their health and well-being. So, because of that, farmers need to apply appropriate safety measures. So first, what is the difference between hazards and risks? Hazard, it is the potential for harm that affects the worker's health. Anything that causes injury or illness to anyone in the workplace is called a hazard. On the other hand, risk is the chance or probability that a person will be harmed or experience an adverse health effect if exposed to a hazard. So there are different types of hazard. The first one is physical hazard. All physical hazards includes to exposure to sleep, trips, falls, electricity, noise, heat, radiation, cold, and fire are all considered as physical hazard. Second is mechanical or electrical hazard. The parts, tools, objects, and materials used in the work are often source of mechanical hazards leading to injuries. Third one is chemical hazard, includes chemical substances. And for farmers, mostly are pesticides, herbicides, cleaning agents, dust, and many more. And number 4 is biological hazard. It includes hazards from bacteria, viruses, insects, and animals. Lastly is the psychosocial environmental hazard. So all the work environment stressors that affect the workers' health, mental, and emotional well-being. And to minimize the risk and hazard, we have farm emergency procedures regarding safety working environment. First one is identifying the potential emergencies. Examples are the hazards given. Second is provide emergency facilities appropriate for the types of hazards in the workplace. And lastly, ensure that all the tools and equipment is working well and not damaged. So farmers must be taught how to use the specific equipments and tools properly. And we also have factors that increases the risk of or injury. And these are the two, age and equipment. In age, we know that some farmers in our country, or most farmers in our country, are old enough for this kind of work. So because of that, their injury rates are highest among the class. Since farming is their main source of living, they still continue working in the farm. And second is the equipment. Most farm accidents involve the use of equipment and machinery. So agricultural companies must teach their workers the proper usage of each equipment machines according to the manufacturer's recommendation. Aside from these procedures, aside from the emergency procedures, we also have cleaning, storing, and waste management. And our main procedures are general cleaning procedures. First, the farmers must be knowledgeable regarding the cleaning procedures. Then they always wear protective personal equipment, and all the tools, equipment, and cleaning agents must be stored in a designated area away from harm. Then we also have proper chemical storage. Proper chemical storage includes the proper labeling and packaging of the chemicals, such as putting words such as poison or caution applied in the chemicals. Then farmers must also avoid storing chemicals such as pesticides in areas with or near food, medical supplies, flammable area, and in the reach of children. And lastly, we have environmental laws that protect the rights of our farmers. The first one is the Presidential Decree 1152 from the Philippine Environmental Code. It provides a basis for an integrated waste management regulation, starting from waste source to methods of disposal. Then we also have RA 6969 or Toxic Substances, Hazardous and Nuclear Waste Control Act. And lastly, we have RA 9003 or Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. And that is all. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.
day everyone, I'm Sebastian T. Francisco and I'm here today to give some insights about the different hazards, risks, and exposures in the farm. Farming involves a lot of activities that are necessary for dairy farming, livestock production, and crop production. And as we do these activities, we are exposing ourselves to a lot of risks. And that's why it is important to be mindful of these hazards and risks to be able to protect ourselves from it and somehow mitigate the risks or to totally avoid it. Before we proceed to the types of hazards, let us know first the difference between hazard, risk, and exposure. Hazard is the potential for harm or adverse effect on an employee's health. Anything which may cause injury or ill health to anyone at or near the workplace is considered as a hazard. Risk is the likelihood that a hazard will cause injury or ill health to anyone at or near a workplace. The level of risk increases with the severity of the hazard and the duration and frequency of the exposure. Exposure occurs when a person comes in contact with a hazard. Now let's discuss the different types of hazard. Hazards are classified into 5 different types. They are number 1, physical. Physical hazards are environmental factors that can harm an employee without necessarily touching them. This includes floors, stairs, work platforms, steps, ladders, fire, falling objects, slippery surfaces, manual handling, excessively loud and prolonged noise, vibration, heat and cold, radiation, poor lighting, ventilation, and air quality. Number 2, mechanical and electrical hazards. Mechanical hazards are mainly caused by malfunction of an equipment, while on the other hand, electrical hazards are mainly caused by electrical failure or malfunction of an electrical equipment. This includes electricity, machinery, equipment, pressure vessels, dangerous goods, forklifts, cranes, and hoists. Number 3, chemical hazard. Is any substance that can cause a problem when ingested or inhaled. This includes chemical substances such as acids or poisons, and those that could lead to fire or explosion, like pesticides, herbicides, cleaning agents, and dust and fumes from various processes such as welding. Number 4, biological hazards. Biological hazards can pose a threat to human health if they are inhaled, eaten, or come in contact with the skin. This includes bacteria, viruses, mold, algae, insects, vermin, and animals. Number 5, psychosocial hazards. Psychosocial hazards are aspects of work which have the potential to cause psychological or physical harm. This includes workplace stressors arising from a variety of sources. Now let's move on to the farm works that involve using chemicals and hazardous tools and equipment. Number 1 is spraying chemicals. Many different chemicals are used on a farm, including pesticides. These chemicals are used to fertilize and control pests, such as insects, weeds, and mollusks. Most of these chemicals are applied by spraying. An example of hazard of using this is when you spray or when you use it and there's suddenly a strong wind and the spray drifting over a dam or a farmhouse. This can contaminate your irrigation system or your supply of water. Well, there are some ways you can reduce the risk of hazards from chemicals. I think we can all agree that using the right personal protective equipment such as respirators, waterproof clothes, rubber gloves, and waterproof footwear is necessary whenever you're doing this kind of activity. And in addition to that, never spray chemicals on days when there is a high wind. Number 2, cutting trees using chainsaws. A chainsaw makes light work of felling and cutting on trees, but treat it with respect. A chainsaw can easily slice through muscle or bone if it kicks back towards you. That is why it is essential to get training from a qualified person before you use a chainsaw. An example of a hazard of using a chainsaw is the chainsaw kickback. This is caused when the upper part of the bar nose contacts a solid object or a switch. This throws the guide bar back towards you and can cause serious injury. That is why it is must to wear and use the correct personal safety equipment, like footwear, neck protection, safety helmet, earmuffs, and eye protection. Hello everyone.
by state controls and regulation of the waste that farmers and agricultural industry produce. Due to the large amount of hazardous waste which farm produce, farmers and anyone involved in the industry must be aware of the correct ways to manage their farm waste. When dealing with hazardous waste, farmers must follow the health and safety regulations. If farm waste including dead stock are managed inappropriately, they can cause contamination of the premises, livestock, inputs, and food. The accumulation of farm waste can also prevent habitats and food purposes. So here are the examples of farm waste. Example of general farm waste. All example and waste material generated through the normal production process, including vegetable culls, cracked eggs, and vegetable and barn wash water. Example of medical waste. Use medical equipment, for example, needles, or unused or expired medical feed, animal health products, packaging, or containers. There are also examples of pesticide waste, unwanted pesticides or containers. Example of dead stock. It covers all on-farm livestock mortalities. So let's move on to what needs to be done and how to store or dispose of farm waste properly. First is general farm waste. Storage. Locate farm waste storage areas away from food handling, input storage, and livestock housing areas to prevent cross-contamination and avoid attracting pests. Make sure farm waste storage areas containers are adequate for the amount of waste generated between disposal times. Clean farm waste storage areas often enough to avoid creating conditions that can cause cross-contamination or attract pests. Where possible, use containers with lids for the storage of farm waste until removal. Disposal. Remove farm waste often in a manner to prevent cross-contamination and avoid attracting pests. Dispose all materials according to municipal laws and provincial regulations. If waste can be used by the other sectors, store and ship them so as not to pose and food safety hazard unless properly sanitized. Vehicles used for transporting farm waste should not be used to transport food, products, and farm inputs. Also, crops grown on the farm can be fed to livestock houses on the same farm. Follow pesticide labels instruction regarding grazing and feeding crops to livestock. Next is use pesticide container. Storage. Triple rinse all the empty pesticide containers by following the steps. First is fill the empty container with water to a minimum of 1/10 of the container size. Number 2 is rinse the capping container by shaking or rolling. Number 3 is empty pesticide container contents into spraying tank. Repeat the steps 1 to 3 2 times. Do not use pesticide container for storage of other items like water or anything. Next is disposal. Take this container to a pesticide container collection site for recycling. There are 4 options to dispose of unwanted pesticide. First is return an unwanted pesticide container to the dealer before winter. Second is apply pesticide to another crop specified in the label. Next is pay a hazardous waste disposal company to dispose of the pesticide. And lastly is participate in the pesticide return. Occasionally, the government, pesticide industry, and agricultural, And next is disposal. Choose a method of regulated and anonymous disposal that is currently approved by the government. Pick up by provincially places livestock pickup service, composting at least 15 meters from any water course and 30 meters from any source of water using for the more domestic purposes. Burial at least 30 meters from any source of water used for domestic purposes and physically constructed to prevent pollution. That's all for the cleaning, storing, and waste management.